Surging prices, skyrocketing inflation and a plunging currency after a shock victory by a far-right candidate in Argentina's presidential primary. So who is Javier Milei? What's behind his election win? And what are his chances in October's presidential race? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Rob Matheson. The election wins by TV personalities are no longer a surprise. Just look at Donald Trump, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, and even Boris Johnson. But it would be fair to say that Javier Milei's victory in Argentina's primary election has sent shockwaves through the political system. And not just there. Markets, international investors and lenders are rattled. Argentina owes more money to the International Monetary Fund than any other country. That's $44 billion, nearly a third of all the IMF's loans. So the global financial system has reacted with alarm. But it's Argentinians who are hardest hit. Hours after the election result, the government devalued the local currency, the peso, by 18% and hiked interest rates to 118%. As a result, the black market dollar exchange jumped to about 750 pesos to the US dollar. That's more than double the official exchange rate. Prices of items such as basic food like bread and milk, as well as essentials like soap, surged overnight by up to 50%. Imported goods, including electronics, rose 20%. Some prices have eased, but the uncertainty has not. Instead, Argentina's long-standing economic woes have worsened. Rampant year-on-year inflation running at well over 100% and 40% of the population living in poverty.
All the prices are increasing and it is difficult to buy things with my budget. Meat prices increased, vegetables cannot be bought. A kilogram of apples is like 1,000 pesos or $3. It's an exaggeration, but hey, it is what we are living with. After the elections, we will see what happens.
For me, this is leading to hyperinflation. The government should start thinking about calling early elections and handing over before it's time. I think it is a finished government.
After the primary elections, it's a disaster. Everything is remarked. We don't have a price. First, the distributors don't deliver. They don't receive merchandise. Supposedly, there is now a 20% increase, and that is how we live. This is Argentina today. It's very sad.
We're going to talk to our guests in a few moments about all of this. First, we're going to hear from our correspondent, Teresa Bo, in the Argentinian capital, Buenos Aires. Teresa, good to have you with us. Who is Javier Milei?
Well, he's an intrigue for many. He calls himself a libertarian, an ultra-conservative, a far-right, among other things. But it's very difficult to pin down exactly what he believes. He's definitely an ultra-liberal. He wants to dollarize the economy in a country like Argentina that is currently struggling with around 14 different types of exchange rates. He wants to shut down the central bank, saying that it is to blame because of the high inflation that exists in the country today, among many other things. He says, for example, that some of that he would implement austerity measures that are far harsher than the ones that the International Monetary Fund is requesting Argentina to implement. On the social agenda, he's against abortion. Let's not forget that Argentina legalized abortion very recently. He says he's going to call for a referendum in order to try to ban it once again. He's against sex education in schools and many other things. But what is interesting is what's been happening in this country, so that at least 30% of the population votes for a candidate such as Javier Milei in a country like Argentina, where that has high government interventions, subsidies, welfare programs, among other things. And many of the areas that Milei has won are some of the poorest areas in this country. So, there's lots of people trying to figure out what's been happening in the country, aside from, of course, the very, very high inflation Argentines have been surviving with. What's been going on so that a candidate like Milei gets so many, many votes?
And that really is at the heart of certainly this stage of the process, isn't it? We were talking about the international markets' reaction to it, the financial markets. But politicians in Argentina must be scratching their heads over this as well. Do we know what drove the voting for him?
No, and let's not forget what's been happening in Argentina. Since President Alberto Fernandez took office, there's been lots of infighting between the ruling coalition, between the center-left Vice President Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner and the president himself. This has generated lots of instability among the opposition. During the primary election, there was lots of fighting amongst the two main candidates. It was a fierce battle in order so that one of them could win the election. And in the middle, there's this population that is stranded, struggling with over 100% inflation in a country where it's difficult for many to make ends meet, with poverty rates on the rise. It's interesting to know that many of those that voted for Milei are young people that have seen politicians fighting among themselves while the rest of the population is struggling. And that's why when you go to many of the poorest areas in Buenos Aires, but also in other parts of the country, people tell you, I have nothing else to lose. I don't care if I don't have a very strong state presence in my life, because that state is not providing for me. So I'm going to vote for Milei. That could set up everything on fire in a country such as Argentina that has a tradition of protests, among many other things. Some of the reforms that Milei would like to implement, like shutting down the central bank or dollarizing the economy, and the impact that something like this could happen in the country, shutting down some of the main scientific research projects that exist in Argentina. This is another thing that he has suggested, or putting an end to the relationship between Argentina and China, because China is a communist country. That's what he said just a few days ago. So certainly many of the reforms he would implement would generate lots of uncertainty, probably violence, but still, many are still willing to vote for him.
Teresa Bo in Buenos Aires. Teresa, thank you. Okay, let's bring in our guest. Alan Cibils is chairman of the Political Economy Department at the Universidad Nacional de General Sarmiento. He's joining us from Buenos Aires. In London, we've got Javier Farje. He's a Latin American affairs analyst. And also in Buenos Aires, joining us by Skype, is Sebastian Lacunza. He's a columnist at Diario AR. It's an online Argentinian news and analysis program. Welcome to the show, sir. Thank you very much indeed. Sebastian, I want to start with you. Is this vote driven by a desire for change, or is it a protest vote?
Well, Argentina has been undergoing a crisis with ups and downs for more than a decade, with a deep recession from 2019 until the end of the pandemic. So, as our colleague from Buenos Aires said, there are many families that live their daily life with problems in terms of employment, housing, transportation, education, the health system. So that is a reality for close to a third of Argentine families, with structural poverty that may reach about 20%. And this is exhausting for many of them. So it usually leads to daily protest, to a burden in the spirit of people, and all of this happens amid a long-standing conservative media and the main conservative opposition that heavily oriented to the right in the last few years, and it is also it plays also a role in the current circumstances.
Javier Farje, let me ask you, does this, trying to look at if there's a positive element to this, and of course the supporters of Javier Milei will say that there is, does this nevertheless give Argentina's politics a kick that perhaps it might have been needed for the last couple of governments?
That's a very good question. It could be a wake-up call for the establishment, that is the government and the traditional conservative side of the Argentinian politics, to realize that something has to change. We have to understand that these primaries were not to choose a president or vice president, but a candidate for particular political parties. What made it relevant was the fact that every Argentinian could vote regardless of what political party they support. So this was a dress rehearsal of the election for the 10th of October. So, sorry, for the 22nd of October. Now, it is definitely, as our colleagues have said before, a protest vote. He won in the strongholds of the Peronista party, like La Boca, for example, in Buenos Aires, where people have actually nothing else to lose. This could be a wake-up call. Now, he won 30%, but the latest opinion poll published yesterday suggests that his personal preference it's 44.5%, with 45.5% against him. So he doesn't really have the election in the bag. That's extremely important and gives time for the other political parties to pull themselves together. Now, the Peronistas are in trouble now because they are in charge of government. It was mentioned that there was a devaluation only the day after these primaries, so maybe to remind people that the situation is still very bad. But also, these policies that Mr. Milei has, we don't know what actually he stands for, but we know what he hates. He doesn't like anything which is left-wing. He wants to break relations with Brazil and China, in spite of the fact that China has just implemented with Argentina a currency swap line which will enable Argentina to get enough funding to pay the debt for the IMF. So he's going to alienate many of the traditional allies of Argentina, and that could scare many people within Argentina, especially in the business sector, who may think, hang on a second, this guy is going a bit too far. We cannot break relations with Brazil. We cannot break relations with China. We have to do something about this. So it's a protest vote. He has continued expressing very radical far-right views, and this might be an element which might go against him. He's a very anti-establishment sort of a politician. So it could be a wake-up call. It could make people think, hang on a second, why don't we listen to the people before we go to the elections and give them what they want, so we don't allow this man to become president? So yes, it could be a wake-up call easily because of the kind of ideas that he actually has.
Alan Cibils, it seems as though the economy is central to everything that we're talking about. Is there anything that you've heard from Javier Milei so far that gives you any indication that he has any idea how to fix the problems that previous governments have not been able to fix?
No. The short answer to that is no. I haven't heard anything that would indicate to anybody who seriously studies and looks at the economy that he has any ideas that will actually improve things. What Milei's proposals really are proposals that haven't been implemented anywhere in the world. Essentially, the sort of libertarian ideal of stateless and totally free market society. That's what he proposes. However, one can expect that once, should he ever come to office, he would moderate his points of view and many of the things he's proposing quite substantially because of what previous speakers have said, the social protests, the pressures from business sectors, etc. But there is one factor in playing in Argentina's economy today that is central to our problems, and that is the presence of the IMF. The IMF's programs, the conditions they impose on those receiving their loans are such that they generate inflation, they generate instability, recession, etc. We are seeing that this play out in real time as we speak. And what Milei has said is that his program would be more radical than the IMF's program. And so one could expect that that would generate a pretty strong reaction from organized sectors of society, especially labor unions, social movements, etc. But one can also expect that it will not solve the economic problems, since they have never solved economic problems in Argentina or anywhere else for that matter.
Sebastian, sorry to interrupt, but I want to go to Sebastian about one sort of longer-term point. I'm reading an article that's suggesting that even if he loses the presidential election, I think his party is going to get 8 Senate seats, and I think the estimate is they would have 35 seats in the lower house. Longer term, what kind of impact is he going to have on Argentinian politics?
The nature and the depth of the depth of the reforms that Javier Milei aims to implement needs parliamentary support, and as you said, he will lack an important, a significant caucus both in Senate and in the lower house. So this will be extremely problematic. Because, for instance, if he wants to dollarize the economy, related to your previous question, well, the dollarization of the economy will lead to many problems, social unrest, and it is very, very difficult to implement. Javier Milei doesn't have an expertise and doesn't have teams to implement such complex policy. So we can imagine that he will get support from traditional conservative coalition, Juntos por el Cambio, the former Mauricio Macri's led coalition. But in that scenario, in that stage, it will not be enough to carry out all the reforms in terms of civil rights, human rights, economic patterns, economic framework in the next term in office. So we have to wait and see not only the situation of the economy in terms of inflation, prices, labor market, the protests in the streets, but also the authoritarian mood, the authoritarian trend of this far right in case of an administration in their hands.
Alan, I want to come back to you with regard to, you were talking earlier about this loan that's being negotiated with the International Monetary Fund at the moment. Clearly that is key to Argentina's economic stability going on in the future. How worried do you think is the IMF about what's going on?
I would suspect, I don't have inside information, but I would suspect they are pretty worried because of the current instability and because of the prospects of a totally unknown candidate with a pretty radical right-wing discourse coming to office. So I think that would make them quite concerned about increased future instability, as one could expect if a program such as Milei's were implemented in Argentina. On the other hand, the IMF has shown a very substantial rigidity in making more flexible conditions on their loans, given Argentina's situation. So one doesn't see a lot of change in what they have demanded. And so the IMF is also contributing quite substantially to this, to the current instability, economic instability. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. What comes first and what will come later is a total unknown, really.
Sebastian, I know you want to come in there, but I'm just going to essentially put you on hold for a second. I want to talk to Javier Farje. Given the circumstances that Argentina finds itself in, and given that this surprise that has happened in politics, given everything that we've been talked about, is there anything that the existing parties can actually promise to do and follow through on that would actually show that they have any sort of influence or control over the economy that would actually benefit Argentinians?
Well, the government might have to renegotiate with the IMF certain elements of the debt. That's the first thing. In fact, the economy minister was in Washington not long ago trying to negotiate with the IMF. That would, if the IMF relaxes a bit the pressure it's putting on Argentina to pay the debt, which China is trying to help pay with this currency swap line of $10 billion, that would improve the situation, because then would make people think, hang on a second, the government is doing something in relation to what's going on here. At the moment, inflation is 116%. How it's going to go down between now and October is going to be very difficult, or the fact that 40% of Argentinians live in extreme poverty. So the government will have to implement certain measures which will enable them to recover the initiative. I don't know whether that will be enough for the people to go back to the Peronistas, maybe not, so maybe they would be more inclined to vote for traditional conservatives. Now, obviously, Milei is going to need votes from the traditional conservative side of Argentinian politics, and Patricia Bullrich is going to probably say, look, we can support you, but you're going to have to change certain policies. Now, The problem is that because of I don't know if the word crazy is the right one, but the extreme ideas that Mr. Milei has in relation to the economy, the dollarization of the economy, the closing down of the central bank, the closing down of Mercosur. He wants to disappear Mercosur altogether. And Argentina is an important member state of Mercosur together with Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Venezuela. He wants to disappear that. That would make it very difficult for Argentina to continue trading with beneficial sort of exchanges. So that he will have to change. The other parties will have to expose the limitations of these extreme ideas to convince people, look, if you vote for this guy, we are going to have a lot of trouble with our trade, we're going to have a lot of trouble with the IMF, we're going to have a lot of trouble with our neighbors, and we cannot afford that. And we're going to have a lot of trouble with China, which has become a very important partner of Argentina in terms of helping them pay the debt. So, first of all, you're talking about the rhetoric, the semantics, exposing the limitations of Mr. Milei's thinking, but also in the case of the government, to have to implement emergency measures which will enable them to recover the initiative and convince people that voting for Javier Milei is a very bad idea indeed.
Mm-hmm. Sebastian, you had a point that you wanted to make just a moment ago.
First of all, I agree with my colleagues that the International Monetary Fund is playing a political role, as it played 4 years ago when it granted the highest loan in the International Monetary Fund's history for $40 billion to the conservative administration of Mauricio Macri. And now it is requiring adjustments and cuts, or have been requiring adjustments and cuts amid a severe drought in Argentina that had affected 25% of exports of the country this year. In addition to this, the dollarization that Javier Milei is proposing has a basic weakness. Argentina, and the central bank particularly, doesn't have dollars. So if Javier Milei wants to convert the Argentine economy into a dollar currency economy, well, where are the dollars and how this process will carry out? You asked about the emergency and the urgent measures that the Peronist administration must implement in the next future. Let me say that in the medium term, as regards the resources and the possibility to export at large scale from the hydrocarbon resources in Vaca Muerta, shale resources, gas and oil, and 2024 year without the drought, with the possibility to export 20 billion more of grains and soybeans, well, will modify the stage for whoever is in office from December.
Alan, I want to ask you about the day-to-day life of Argentinians, because, of course, those are the ones with the votes, and those are the ones that in many ways, people would say those are the most important ones. Those are the ones that matter. Everything that we've been talking about, Sebastian has gone through some of the options that are available to the two parties over the next few months as emergency measures and so on. These seem to be large-scale operations. They seem to be to do with the country as a whole and the economy as a whole. Is there anything that you can see that the parties would be able to do that would directly affect the daily lives of Argentinians by trying to ameliorate the price, the prices of goods in the shops, for example?
Yes, I mean, it's interesting because we've been talking about what some of the sort of more macro impacts of Milei's proposals are regarding China, Mercosur, dollarization, etc. Well, dollarization is a slightly different situation, but the truth is, most of the people who have voted for Milei are young, mostly male, and also workers that have very precarious jobs, platform jobs, jobs with no sort of security, and also with relatively low incomes that barely make ends meet. And so I think there's a very substantial discontent amongst a lot of the electorate. Not all of them have voted for Milei because of this sort of income situation, which has lost consistently against inflation. So clearly, the government is currently considering measures such as, for example, a freeze, fuel hikes from here till the end of the year or through November. There's talk of salary increases by decree in order to provide a jump in people's incomes to deal with the current price jump, but also to deal with a longer-term situation of depressed wages. Price controls, as it were, or price agreements is probably more correct, are also measures that are being, will probably be announced next week. The thing is, of course, will that be enough to change the electorate's mood between now and October? That, of course, remains to be seen. Will it be seen as simply a move because of the elections? Then after the elections, it will be back to the current situation.
Okay, I want to ask all three of you, we are getting towards the end of the show, but I do want to ask all three of you briefly. I'll start with you, Alan. Do you think he's got a chance of winning in October?
I wouldn't know what percentage to give him. I think it depends a lot on how the economic situation mostly evolves between now and then. I think the chance is there. I wouldn't say it's more than 50% chance.
Alan, forgive me for interrupting, but I do want to ask the other two. Javier, let me ask you about whether or not you think what his chances are in October.
He has 30% of the vote. That's not enough to win in the first round. He might probably go to the second round, to the runoff. It will depend very much on whether the conservative side of the Argentinian politics will vote for him if he goes second. If the conservatives go second as well, they may prefer to vote for a less controversial right-wing candidate. The Peronistas, I don't think they have the chance to win this one. So he's not necessarily is going to win the election. It's time for people to react to that. But also, if this was, as we all know, a protest vote, then it will be a wake-up call for the other parties. And his ideas might not be enough for people to say, look, I'm going to vote for you, even though you have some quite bizarre sort of political and economic
Sebastian,
ideas.
let me come to you now.
He's not going to necessarily win.
Thank you very much, Javier. Sebastian, let me come to you. What do you think his chances are in October?
He can scale up as Bolsonaro did in Brazil some years ago, but both the conservative coalition of Patricia Bullrich and the Peronist left-leaning coalition have proved in the past that they have the strength to recover from difficult situations. And the race is not over.
Sebastian, thank you very much indeed. And thanks to all of our guests, Alan Cibils, Javier Farje and Sebastian Lacunza. And thank you too for watching. Now you can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And of course, you can join the conversation on X, formerly known as Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Rob Matheson, and the whole team here, bye for now.